Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 46 of Podcast of Five Rings, your source of enlightenment in the realm of video games, tabletop, anime, film, and tech. Each episode of Podcast of Five Rings releases Monday mornings on iTunes and Soundcloud, and topic by topic, day by day on YouTube, with the full video releasing on Friday. Catch updates about the podcast or for other news, give us a follow on your social media platform of choice, listed in the description below. I'm your host, GM, and overseer of Podcast of Five Rings, Obsidian, joined tonight by the wall that will not fall, Tetsuo.
Hey everyone.
How's it going, man?
It's going.
Yeah.
busy.
Same. Yeah, it's been a long 4 days at work for me. We got the Dark Fortune Duelist meta.
Yo.
And the Resident Wildcard Mao.
Howdy.
We're all here for what is essentially our 1 year anniversary here that we've been doing this. So, not quite episode 50 yet. We still got 4 more episodes till that milestone. But it has been a year. So, congrats, guys. We're still here doing it. We're still here talking about inane stuff. So, what's everybody been up to this week?
I don't know, work.
Yeah, pretty much.
Lots and lots.
I bought a chair with back support. It's pretty nice.
Oh, nice.
My last chair did not have it.
See, my last one had the curvy back thing where it like pokes out towards the bottom
The
to get
lumbar
you to
support?
yes, to get you to sit up straighter.
Mm.
And then that chair fell apart basically from the bottom somehow. So now I'm back to old Mr. Wobbles, as I like to call him, Mr. Squeaky. Yeah.
Could be worse.
I've been getting the Mao syndrome. We're having little motivation to play video or do much of anything other than lay down when I get home. It's baseball season, so work is getting busy.
I tried to play some Skyrim, but I was trying to add some mods first, and it had been so long since I'd played, it just didn't work out. I'm gonna have to start from scratch.
You just couldn't get the mods to work?
No, like it was crashing, and I don't know why.
Oh, gotcha.
It's been like, I don't know, a year probably since I last played it.
Just can't remember how to get it going, I guess.
No. Well, yeah, and then I installed a bunch of new mods because I don't know, why not? But that was a mistake.
It's alright, Mal. We all make mistakes. You will learn someday. Well, I guess we can go ahead and get into topics then. We're going to have Tetsuo lead us off tonight, so have at it, bud. What you got?
Well, in addition to being swamped with work, was kind of helping a buddy out towards the beginning of the week, kicking around the idea of starting a sci-fi game that's rotationary. Whatever the right word that I'm trying to use is, where after every couple sessions, having it be so that the GM can switch out, maybe theoretically even switch systems, just kind of having a generic play space for small, short, monster of the week style, one-shot type deals going.
I think you might have cut out there for a little bit there, Tess.
Sorry, I was just saying that it's just like a sandbox for people to play in kind of just monster of the week style type deal. But I was making a star map for it, and like I really like sci-fi, and I'm not a big fantasy fan.
For shame.
Loving. I mean, I enjoy it. I'm just not. It's just not like my.
Yeah, I gotcha.
In the same way that sci-fi can be. And so I was thinking about it, and I was like, I really more sci-fi games, but they don't ever seem to happen. There's some systems out there, and they all have their own little niches and stuff, but and so I was kind of thinking about it, and I was like, I think part of it is that sci-fi games are a lot harder to run than fantasy games are. There's a lot of inherent I guess, differences in the genre, and as far as the general media, across the board goes, that I don't think translates as well to RPGs as fantasy does. I was curious about y'all's opinions on that. Why is it difficult? Why does it seem so difficult for people to really dive into sci-fi?
Well, I think it's probably nearly impossible to play actual hard sci-fi RPGs, just because, I mean, you'd have to try and keep everything accurate would just be a mess.
Yeah.
The actual
You have to have a
science.
really good, not good per se, but like a group that's like focused in on that.
Everybody's engineers playing.
Right. Everyone have to have like a degree in whatever the situation was.
Yeah.
But I mean, there are quite a few sci-fi RPGs around. So I guess, well, you're meaning without. I guess you're talking about without any magic, right? Because Shadowrun is sci-fi.
And that was kind of my thought process. Like the sci-fi games that do well, and this is going to get into a whole nother nerd argument that we won't really dive into, but you start seeing them venture more towards science fantasy or space opera, or all of these other things that take it further and further from, as you said, hard sci-fi. I guess there's kind of like a matrix, the way I see it anyway. You have hard and soft science, and then you have how I guess magical things can be, whether it's actual magic or just technology that's so advanced it's indistinguishable from magic.
Like in Numenera or whatever.
Right.
I think it's easier to handwave things in fantasy, just as magic or whatever. There are what is it? Eclipse Phase is a hard sci-fi.
That's a game I've never heard of.
I've heard of it. It's very interesting, I guess.
You say that in the curse form of interesting.
Yeah.
Well, it deals with transhumanism, and from what I understand, it's a topic I was going to talk about, the show Altered Carbon on Netflix. The Eclipse Phase is kind of based off of ideas that the authors got while reading the book Altered Carbon. And then when they made the Netflix series, they drew some of the things from the book, but then also pulled things from Eclipse Phase. But yeah, it's very transhumanism oriented centric. It's not.
Yeah, I think it's very. I can't remember if everyone is in like a artificial body, or it's just very easy to get them. And
I think it's a little of both.
Some of them are like like the game is very upfront with like some of them look like children and are usually for the sex industry sort of style.
Yeah, it can get weird.
Yeah.
Say that.
Well, the game is post-apocalyptic, conspiracy and horror. So the idea of being just very upfront and direct about those kind of things, I feel like helps play into the whole point of trans.
Right.
Yeah.
And then so with the fantasy side, you've also got like I mean, when you say fantasy, at least everyone usually most people go towards like elves and dwarfs and like European style fantasy, right? And which everyone kind of has there's just, and with D&D just being like so prevalent, it's like
it's probably just what most people are conditioned to.
Yeah,
like being comfortable role playing in.
Right, it's the closest thing to just like a generic base setting that people have to go to. Whereas with science fiction, you can have depending on like it could be like our world just slightly in the future. I mean, you've got like Cyberpunk 2077, and you've got space travel, time travel.
Right. There's a
all
lot more
sorts of things you could go to. Yeah, I mean, aliens.
And I think, like, too, one of the retreats that people use RPGs for is to live that kind of power fantasy, I guess, aspect
Yeah.
of RPGs.
Or maybe,
And
or fantasy is like a simpler setting with at least like technological wise,
yeah, it's easier to distill
Mhm.
down that it's your character who has these innate abilities, not your character has a gun that can do this thing because it has this drive and you have this ship and
That's the other thing is guns never. You can't get guns to feel right ever in a
yeah.
RPG setting.
I know
I would
that
think
was
that's
my
one of its
points.
biggest drawbacks.
Yeah, that was one of the thoughts that one of my main thoughts too was just that guns, while they can work in gaming situations, they don't work as well in RPG combat scenarios. And again, combat is one of the main reasons people come to RPGs. You have combat less, games and systems and stuff, but most people think part and parcel D&D and slashing a monster with your sword, And so yeah, guns don't work as well, especially when you could always just call in a nuke from orbit, like solve your problems there.
Just I mean, it's the only way to be sure.
Exactly.
Excessive force always required.
What do you mean your AC is too high for the rocket launcher?
Hey, I'm small. It takes a penalty when it attacks me. My AC goes up, right? It's like an orbital laser. No.
Beside the fireball.
Yeah, I don't know. It's weird, and I guess from my experience, because we had been playing Starfinder, and the GM was trying to make it more sci-fi than fantasy, and one of the players in the game, not me, is more into the sci-fi aspects of things. Tends to like sci-fi shows and stuff more than fantasy-esque stuff. And he was even like, you know what? It's like an RPG. I'm not sure if I really like think this is like super interesting or can like control my interests week to week. Granted, we were telling an overarching story, so it probably just depends on like the GMs and the players more than anything what they like out of role-playing games, I guess.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't really working for me, and I was trying to play a Robotech pilot, so there you go.
I mean, have you guys ever? Have you guys ever run any sort of sci-fi setting?
I have not. I'm not super big into sci-fi, so
I don't know enough people who are really into sci-fi. When I was younger, like back in high school.
In your younger and more vulnerable years.
Yeah, my younger and vulnerable years. I used to roll with a group that was pretty into different things of trying for at least RPGs and whatnot. But the most sci-fi we ever got into was like mech, and that was about as far as I ever got. But I also know that the options, like as silly as it sounds, the options back then and the options now, vastly different. Vast.
So yeah, even over like 10 years.
Yeah,
we've got
10 years times. Yeah,
we have like a proliferation of role playing games you can find anywhere.
Yeah,
it's I mean, because this is back when like 3.5 like exploded. So
so early 2000s or whatever.
Yeah. So that was when we were goofing around with it, and then like I said, then I met up with the group and we started to do other things around that. But I mean, just 3.5 had been out, 3.0 was out. You had all these open license stuff, and then there was tons of other people who were utilizing to try to make their own things, and you had that all happen. So you kind of there really wasn't like the options for it. I know there was always a love for it though. We all liked sci-fi stuff, but I mean, as you stated before, there's just like there was the options weren't really there, and we weren't gonna obviously do our own thing. And even more, just looking at like how sci-fi is done, as Tats put earlier, it ends up being where you kind of end up pushing into sci-fi fantasy or or into space opera, because I mean space opera is honestly just easy to do because it's less about worrying about hard science and more worrying about telling a story that just happens to be in space or sci-fi. And then sci-fi fantasy, obviously you can just do stuff. I think I want to say, oh no, even that example, I was gonna say, I think the only other thing that we played was is really more sci-fi fantasies. We ended up playing a game, I don't remember the name of it for the life of me, but it was, as you stated earlier, it just ended up being a game where it was just like a different, or was it Mao? One of you two. You're so easy to confuse. We ended up playing a game where it was essentially Earth ourselves, but shifted over in a different time frame, like essentially an AU, and it ended up being invaded by this force, by this outside force, and we didn't know what it was. But everybody gained powers, but it was still running on the science of the world itself. And that's the only other example I have of like how hard we stuck to science, but there was still fantasy. There were still fantasy elements to everything. So
I've got a story to tell later that you just reminded me of a game we once played that I won't get into because it'll completely derail this topic, but remind me. I'll tell you all about it later. I almost want to tell it on the show too, but anyways.
Well, the two games that I can think of that I've really played, the first actually was Mecha versus Kaiju, if you can kind of call that sci-fi. Because again, where does Mecha fall on sci-fi? I'm doing air quotes.
Well, I mean,
you guys can't see me doing.
I mean, like there's generally two different types of mecha. You either get like Code Geass, where it starts being less about actual mechs and more about like
the
super
robots.
Yeah, super robots. And then you can get stuff like BattleTech or I mean, that's honestly probably the best one. Just a good example of where it really is just like, this is mechs and we're talking about mechs and you have sciencey mechs and that's about it.
Walking tanks.
Yeah, they're just walking tanks, and that's like that is the other end of the spectrum. So
so what's your kind of summation of plans that you guys want to do for your game?
Well, real fast, the other system, because this will plug into your question. There's another system that we came across. If you play a lot of sci-fi, you'll know of Traveler. But there was a team that was inspired by Traveler, which is a really, really hard sci-fi game in the sense that like your characters can die during character creation on the tables. It's when they call it hard sci-fi, it's one of the hardest out there, but it also kind of becomes or EVE Online, where it just becomes spreadsheets in space. You know, your traders, your truckers, your traffickers, whatever. I mean, there's more to Traveler than that, but it can kind of become.
I don't know. A game that lets me be a trucker in space sounds pretty badass.
Yeah, space truckers.
I'd rather just play Firefly.
There was a team that was inspired by that, and they wrote a Fate. Yes, I know I'm going back to Fate. They wrote a Fate splat book called Diaspora, which had a really interesting planetary creation system, and it had a very, very, very loose narrative that was connected to it. The reason why I bring it up in relation to your question is that's one of the things that they want to do for all the different systems that I had come up with in the star map, is to do the Diaspora cluster creation, system creation thing. Beyond that, I don't know how hard sci-fi he's talking. I don't know if he's planning on doing some hand-wavingness. Because again, like, I think hard sci-fi can be a bit of a spectrum. Like, at some point you can kind of just... There's some type of artificial gravity on your ship. But that's... warp drives and stuff, you know, you're starting to get softer and softer and softer. So I don't know exactly where he's planning on going with that. And I think it's also just something he's like. So.
Yeah. Hey man.
I think Mao said it best earlier on. Is that getting to truly being hard sci-fi is there's just a sense where it's impossible.
Yeah, the further you go, the harder it probably is, or more difficult. I guess.
I mean, the bigger the setting, the more you incorporate, the more like science you have to know.
Here's the other death knell to
sci-fi
it.
is hard
And I think here's the other death knell to hard sci-fi in general is that when you really look at it, the more science you get, the more explanation of things you get, the harder it is to really incorporate that into a fast, movable, rolling system.
Right.
And that's the other killer for it. Is you can hard science all you want every day, all day, but I mean, when you look at real hard science and you look at like all the testing and stuff you have to do, all the information knowledge that you have to have, all the things that are required to just figure something out, that would take fucking forever in a rolling system. I mean, there's no way you can truly incorporate that in a way that's going to properly capture the time and effort that back up the knowledge of hard science and still allow you to play a game at a remotely likable speed that will see progress happen.
And let everybody have fun while they're at it. Because that's the other thing.
Yeah.
I don't know, if everybody at the table has fun, like, randomly stopping the game, jumping on Wikipedia to read how this theory works, maybe it's not as hard. I don't think that's the general majority of RPG players, though.
Yeah.
The system would probably have to be pretty mechanics lot, I would imagine, too.
Yeah. And those type of stories, too, because they'd be so heavy on having to know the science, I feel like both the players and the GM would start separating themselves from the science so they don't have to deal with it.
Yeah.
Or like intrigue-based, character-based, and all that stuff. And then in that case, why don't you just play it in modern day or fantasy? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like
much easier to drop down to the soft science of like Star Trek or something.
Yeah.
I think you're better off if you want a game that's hard science but not actually hard science. The best thing you can do is present it like it is. Sometimes presentation is everything. Don't worry about the fact that it's not actually hard science. Just present it like it's hard science, and it's far more easy to swallow, so to speak.
And players tend to fill in the blanks a lot as well.
They
So
do.
if you present it right, they can. You don't have to have the answers because the players will have the answers.
Yeah, I mean, there's just, just give an example. Like, I know we talked about Starfinder, and when you start playing Starfinder, you're gonna realize that like, this is kind of fantasy-ish, just with lasers and shit. And yeah, that's exactly what it is. It hides it really well though, because Starfinder presents itself to be like, oh, it's very futuristic and it's got lasers and guns and stuff. But when you start to really get into it, you realize that there's just a lot of fantasy involved. It's just presented well, and I think that's a good thing until you start to really find, it's not maybe your cup of tea when you really figure out for what it is. But if you can present it as such and just find a system that seems to click, then your hard science will be sold as long as you are a good salesman.
Hard science.
And
Nobody wants soft science.
I mean, and I guess too, kind of a side comment, like when people think, sci-fi, if they're not thinking laser guns and laser swords, they're thinking space combat. They're thinking, everybody wants to be the pilot. And the people, and you're supposedly like on one ship, it's either going to be really awkward for everybody to be flying the ship, or anytime spaceship combat gets brought up, it's one person and one person only doing things. And that's not fun.
Yeah. That's what we ran into. Something with Starfinder.
Yeah, like, if you want starship combat, pick up a miniature game or, Star Wars Armada or whatever.
I was actually thinking that. I feel like Starship Combat really should come down to that. Really feels like in and of itself, it's almost like its own game. I don't know of any game personally, and not to say that I have experience on sci-fi games, because I don't. But that was something I also noticed too when I was going through the instructions, like to just go back to Starfinder. It's just an easy one to pick on. That was, as obviously that was something just very easy to notice right off the bat, is that it really does feel like certain people have a far larger impact on what's going on as opposed to some other people. And there's just a point where it almost feels like maybe we should just make it a mini game in and of itself and just give everybody like things that they can do on their turn.
Yeah. Or have like, everybody make their stuff, everybody has like, you're on shields, you're on guns, you're on piloting, everybody does their things, and then
Well, yeah, I mean that's what Starfinder does.
Yeah.
I haven't
it does
fully
do
looked at all of that, so
Starfinder does do that. But
Yeah, it's
also-
like piloting check.
Yep.
And then you've got gunners, and the captain can kind of boost to wherever, and then you've got engineer who can repair stuff.
Yep.
Or just give everyone a fighter.
Yeah.
Fighters are fun.
Yeah.
But then you only have like one guy who's the pilot, and then you have the random botanist that you've thrown into a fighter jet, and
The random botanist.
you know what I mean? Like the
Hey,
character.
if he's
who's
got
playing,
ranks
like,
in pilot, he's good.
Yeah, he's good. He's good.
Yeah, but if he doesn't,
What's
you know,
this
like,
button
he's
do?
a
Click.
lore character.
Yeah, he can use his pilot ranks to attack stuff.
Oh.
But yeah.
One game and Mao actually mentioned it. One game that I'd love to take a look at is Firefly, because from what I understand, that does a pretty good job. But it again does the whole. It's sort of hard sci. I mean, Firefly. It's sort of hard sci-fi,
No,
but it's
that's
not.
soft sci-fi.
Right. It's they do the good job of putting the veneer of hard over soft. Like it's easier to
It's in the
ignore.
soft science Wikipedia section.
Yeah. Easier to ignore like the soft sci-fi bits than say in like Star Wars or something.
Yeah, you can't really call Star Wars sci-fi at all, honestly.
Yeah.
No, not
It's
really.
fantasy space paint.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's my
Very
favorite
much so.
analogy. So
Which is okay in and of itself. If
Yeah.
that's whenever you're looking for sci-fi, that's actually what you're looking for. Hey, it's no issue. But and that's why I said, what defines sci-fi can be a whole topic in and of itself. But
and I have no answer for you there. So
yeah.
but yeah, it sounds like it's a broad spectrum of different stuff. Just based on the hard and soft terminology.
And I think too, one of the other big things is that as a literary genre where it started, like sci-fi was always a way to explore a culture or a person's like possible futures if they pursue certain philosophies, whatever what's the other term? Speculative fiction. Like it was always a way for you to explore different ideas within the confines of a structured like story. And I feel like that's still harder to do in RPGs because everybody brings to the table what they want to play. Like you bring your
Yeah,
character.
it's all in the present and stuff. And
Right, and it's harder
now-
to do that speculation. I don't know. There's a lot there.
Sounds like you'll have a lot of systems you need to port through, probably,
Yeah.
to find one that
Yeah,
fits what you want.
The three biggest that we've been looking at is Stars Without Number, Traveler, and Diaspora. But I don't know if we'll find something else.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like Fate's pretty neat. It is pretty nice in the sense that you can do the whole soft sci-fi, but putting a layer of paint over it, so that way it's easily hidden as hard or sci-fi with the
Yeah.
way aspects are handled.
And it's
everything.
mechanics
But-
lot-ish, so
Right, exactly. The more mechanics you bring in, the more you have to really know the difference.
yeah.
What point should damage level step up because you're going faster in free fall and blah 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 and C factor blah 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 blah.
Just getting a shot with a laser just kill you.
Or does it cauterize the wound?
Okay.
Anyway.
All right.